Okay, are we ready to go? Can you hear me, James?
Yeah, we're ready to go. We're live, so I'll send you through.
Okay. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Bienvenue tout le monde. My name is Isabelle Caillé and I'm the Director of Sports Safety at the Coaching Association of Canada. Je m'appelle Isabelle Caillé, je suis la directrice dans la sécurité dans le sport. Thank you for being here today for our very first Coaching Through COVID webinar series. We'll be hosting a series of 6 webinars over the course of the next few months, right up until March. And the purpose of these webinars is really to support and re-engage coaches returning to sport. So we're attempting to pilot this in a bilingual format. And so we hope that you can enjoy this in the language of your choice. And we have put in the chat a phone line and a call-in code for those of you that want to receive simultaneous translation into French. So that is available in the little chat at the top of the bar. Our format for today is going to be about 25 to 30 minutes of a presentation, followed by about 30 minutes of questions and answers. So we encourage you to put any of your questions that you have throughout the presentation in the chat, and we'll be sure to answer them for you. Please put them in the language of your choice. So, s'il vous plaît, mets tes questions dans la langue de ton choix. At the end of the session, we'll do a quick feedback survey for you to complete. So just before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. Today, I'm here in Ottawa on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people, and realize that we're here today across our vast country. So the land that surrounds us is part of who we are, and it reflects our history. So we'd like to acknowledge it today. And so I'm really excited to turn it over now to our guest speaker and expert presenter, Dr. Adrienne Leslie-Toogood. She's joining us today from Winnipeg. She is a mental performance consultant and has her own consulting company called Toogood Consulting. And we also have with us 2 guests that work with Adrienne. We have swim coach Blastic and swim athlete Kelsey joining us. And they'll be also here to talk to you a little bit and share about their experiences. And if you have any questions for any of them at the end, please be open to asking your questions. So I'm going to turn it over now to Adrienne. So welcome and thank you for being here, Adrienne.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity, Isabel, and I'm looking forward to speaking with all the coaches that have joined us today. As Isabel mentioned, I'll talk for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the real stars of the show, and that's Blastic Cherney and Kelsey Wog, 2 individuals who represent our country incredibly well internationally, and it's a privilege to have the opportunity to interact with them. So today we're going to talk about coaching through COVID, and in speaking about that, we are going to talk about the concept of human first, because I think COVID's a real opportunity for us. As performers, we often are focused on the performance, and behind the performance is a human being. And with COVID, it's forcing us to acknowledge and understand the complexity of what that really means, and perhaps learn from it and grow from it through this time. So human first, how embracing your humanity can unlock performance and help you create unstoppable athletes. I would love, Isabel mentioned this chat area, I'd love for you just to interact with each other a little bit. And in that chat area, make some comments about what you think about as human first. When you hear the words human first and you think about it in terms of how it relates to you as a coach, I want you to just put in there any comments that you have around that and the meaning for you. Today, we're going to break our time up into 3 chunks. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the reality of where we're living right now, and that's COVID-19, something that perhaps we thought we would get through and push through like we always do. And now we're realizing it's a bit more of a marathon other than a sprint. And we need to figure out what that means. We need to figure out what that means in the context of returning to sport and coaching. Then I want to move into this idea of being human and what that means, especially with respect to performance. And a part of that too is prioritizing recovery. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to include a ton of resources. I wanted to ensure Sorry, I'm in a building right now and it appears as though the alarm might be going off. We'll see how it goes. Life is messy, a good illustration of that. But I'm going to give a ton of resources, and I would love to plant seeds, and you can feel free to go and look this up. This individual is Alison Garner, and she has a TED Talk. And she talks about the fact, with her own unique story, that life is messy. And you know what? When it gets messy, we're wired to try and avoid that. And right now in COVID, life is definitely messy. And in fact, if you look at the American Red Cross, they have a diagram when they look at kind of the psychosocial phases of disaster. And the reality that as human beings, we go through phases with these disasters. Now with COVID, it's a global pandemic. So the timeline at the bottom of this chart does not make any sense. And in fact, it's not just a one-time thing, it's a cycle. And so all that means is that yourself and your athletes could be in very, very different places depending on where they're at and experiencing this circumstance. There are also the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, and emotions are something that are happening right now. This is an individual named Jason Thompson, and he has a site on Instagram, and he talks about all the different aspects of emotions that people could be experiencing at any time. And although it's a cartoon, it's also a reality of how we're feeling and what we're experiencing right now. So if we look at that context, we have COVID, there's a ton we can't control, and yet you're a coach, and coaches feel responsible. They feel responsible for performance. They take it incredibly seriously, and they're wondering where their control lies and what their role is right now. If we look at the culture of sport, we also have a culture in sport of high performance where vulnerability is seen as weakness. And we often mask our emotions and we act like it's okay when sometimes it's not. These are important contextual factors that I want us to consider. The Canadian Olympic Committee, when the Olympic Games were canceled, had some wonderful programming for our athletes in this country. And one of the speakers that presented to the athletes was Chris Hadfield, an astronaut. And he shared experience with them, lived experience. And he said, "You're in a new place right now. The old place is gone. We need to accept where we are. And you know what? You became an expert before. We need to become an expert in this place." The other thing he spoke about was the fact that as an astronaut, it's okay to ask for help. And you know what else? You need to become an expert in you. And so as we're thinking about this new coaching context and this new reality, I think it's really important for us to give space for ourselves and understand what we need to be our best, but also with our athletes and how our athletes are responding. It might be different now, and that's okay. Become an expert in what your athletes need right now and an expert in who they are. This is Monica Fife. When I first moved back to Canada, I worked with Monica. She was an air rifle athlete. She traveled a lot internationally as a young person, and she had some success and some days were tougher. And one of the competitors sat down with her one day when she was struggling and asked her this question. And they said, "Do you know who you are?" She took a kind of a deep breath and said, "I have no idea." And the competitor said, "Well, you need to figure that out. You need to know who you are so that you know who you want to bring to the line every day. And only when you understand that will you understand when you're not in that place." So again, as we think about that and we think about our athletes and our performers, do we know who they are? Do we know who they want to bring every day? Do we understand what they need to do to be their best? This is Skylar Park, junior world champion, an athlete who pre-qualified for the Tokyo Games and will be heading there in 2021. And she talked about that journey for herself. And she talked about the fact that she needed to learn to trust herself because that's when she found her best performance, by being herself. And so right now, that might mean different things for our athletes, and we need to stay in tune with what they know. The other thing that we know about human beings is that when we're aligned with what makes our heart sing and what makes us great and what we love about it, we know that we can get good performance. This is Bailey Bram. She was the last cut before going to an Olympic Games and had to decide if she wanted to go back. She decided to work hard and do it because she loved it. And this is Bridget Laquette, who was the first First Nations female to make our women's hockey team. So it's really important that we think about those things. And as well, during this time, we remember the lesson that our identity and our value is actually more than our sport and more than our results. And the world's been put on pause, and it's given that opportunity for us to think about that. The most important part right now is that we also need to identify who is on our team and who our true supports are. And what's unbelievably powerful and beautiful about sport is that we have a lot of built-in support and built-in teams. We know how to support each other, and we need to ensure that during this time, we're clearly seeing each other. We're looking at each other and we're understanding who is sitting before us. It may not be all good right now. It may be difficult right now, and that's okay. Let's make sure that we connect with each other. For myself in supporting athletes, I found that there were times where I was struggling with how to best support them. And I, in fact, was looking at research, and they were looking at people who survived concentration camps. And they found that the people who did not survive were the people who were optimists. They were the people who kept thinking it was going to get better, and they continued to have their heart broken. And in some ways, as I found myself talking with my athletes, I found that I was trying to convince them that it would be okay and that it was going to be better. And I recognized that, you know what? It may not be okay. It's not going to be better right now. And I read this quote by Brené Brown, and it really resonated with me and helped me understand my role right now. And that was that empathy isn't about fixing. It's about the brave choice to be with someone in their darkness, not to race to turn the light on so we feel better. And so although often as coaches, we think very much of technical and tactical things, I think it's really important for us to sit down and think about how we can be with our athletes, and we can allow them to be really seen, and we can allow them to show up who they are and show up in a way so that we can help them and help us embrace their humanity. Because the reality is, at the end of the day, we are all human beings. We do all respond to stress and pressure in a certain way because that's the way we're wired. We have a brain in our head, we have a heart, we have a vagal nerve that's the longest nerve in our body. And right now, maybe we need to provide opportunities and spaces for our athletes to feel and be honest with us about what they are feeling. Maybe we need to help them be compassionate emotion scientists, as Mark Brackett says, and help them pay attention to what's happening in them. And in the past, in sport, perhaps we did not pay attention to that. And perhaps our athletes did not openly share what they were struggling with because we didn't need to have those conversations, but maybe right now we do. And maybe we need to think back to some basic concepts that we use in sport, that we use to help with physical load, and we need to think about periodization. But maybe we can think about it from an emotional well-being standpoint, and we can understand that people have a lot of load on them right now, and I need to consider that load in the context of what I'm asking for, because otherwise I might have too much stimulus, and my athlete may not respond in the way that I want. Maybe I also want to look at the basics of psychological health and Maslow and understand that right now, some of those lower needs are not being met by my athletes. And maybe as a coach, I can help to have those conversations and help that athlete understand what they need so that they can thrive as a human being, because right now we're paying attention to the human behind the performance. Several years ago, there was a story that happened and really caught the world by storm. There was a soccer team, and they were in Thailand, I believe it was, and they had gone into a cave to explore, and they got stuck in that cave. And what was unbelievable is that every one of those athletes maintained their well-being and their emotions and their minds, and they got out of there safely, which was an incredible feat. And the part of the story that I want to draw our attention to is when they came out of the cave, a reporter asked the coach what they did. And the coach said to the athlete that, said to the reporter that, you know, we did meditation. And I'm not necessarily promoting meditation. I'm promoting this idea of being proactively well. This coach recognized it was a very stressful situation. This coach recognized that there were high stakes, and if the athlete was too stressed or, you know, it would be tough to get them back into a healthy and positive place. And I think none of us would disagree with that. And so the coach did something proactively to keep them well. And I think right now it's interesting to consider the same, to consider the fact that perhaps we are in a situation that's stressful. And what do we need to do to keep ourselves and to keep our coaches well? There's lots of different types of breathing you can do. This is just one type of breathing. We know that breathing is incredibly helpful and helps us to maintain control and stay in charge of our body and ourselves. We have something here called SEAS, and it's just a fun acronym that myself and a colleague came up with. It's the idea of slowing your breathing down, exhaling longer than you inhale, allowing your abdomen to inflate and softening your shoulders. We know if we do that, that we're balancing out our parasympathetic response. We're calming ourselves down. We're maintaining ourselves in control. This is something from the Canadian Mental Health Association that I took and I modified for more of a sport context. A lot of times we have difficulty understanding when our athletes are, or ourselves are, emotionally well. We don't have the words for that, the same that we know how to understand if our body is recovered or well. And this just helps us to try and, unpack that. So it's just a regular part of our conversation. Are we in a green place? Are we healthy? Are we struggling? Or are we in a tough place right now? Are we injured? Do we need take some time? And these are just common things that are associated with emotional well-being. That when we are well, we're more calm. We concentrate better. When we're struggling, we might be more irritable or sad or angry. So, this idea of, how do we begin to normalize this part of the conversation and help ourselves and our athletes understand when they're well, what things they need to stay well, what are the triggers, what are the signs? Susan David talked about it in a different way, and she talked about the idea of emotional agility, the ability to be with our thoughts, to be curious and compassionate when we have emotion, rather than as the culture of our society and sports says, where we pretend we don't have emotion, we push them away. What if we started to acknowledge them and be curious and compassionate? And what if, as Emily Potter says, we started to think, it's okay to not be okay right now. And you know what? I'm going to let myself feel how I'm going to be feeling, because I know that's what I need to do to perform and be my best. A huge part of that is prioritizing recovery and making sure that we take care of ourselves. Kelly McGonigal is an individual who also has a great TED Talk. And once again, all these resources are at the end if any of them are of interest to you if you have not yet seen them. And she talks about, recognizing our stress response can be helpful and can create the biology of courage rather than, trying not to be anxious. What if we embraced it as an opportunity to learn? The other piece that I'm seeing with a lot of the athletes I work with is them giving themselves permission to care and be passionate again and strive towards sport. Our world is in a global pandemic. Sport seems tangential and not important, but for our athletes, it's their lifeblood. It's something really important, and it gives them purpose and meaning. And it's okay to want that. It's okay to strive to be the best version of ourselves in this new reality we live in, and to find ways so that we can care again deeply about something, even though it may be taken away from us. And that takes a lot of courage to do, but we need to start living with courage, because that's what we are born to do. We know in sport, we have this dual model of passion. We have harmonious and obsessive passion, and we may not have even paid attention to that before, but now it might be before us because we're finding it really hard to recover when we're not able to train in the way that we used to be able to train. So we need to start to pay attention to this and make sure that we're managing it when we become obsessively passionate about it. Failure is something we're used to in sport. We need to be comfortable with it. We need to process it. Failure can lead to emotional injuries when we don't deal with it. At the top of the left-hand screen is someone named Kurt Tribble. Kurt's a cardiothoracic surgeon. I have a lecture series that I host at the Canadian Sports Centre that's coming up, and Kurt Tribble was one of our speakers. At the end of our lecture, the audience asked him a question, and they asked him what he does when he loses a patient, because when he fails, when he makes a mistake, he loses a life. And he said that I had to find out a strategy to do with that, or I couldn't continue to be a heart surgeon. And for him, it was remember and forgive. He spent time reflecting on that operation so that he could honor their life by becoming a better doctor moving forward. And then he forgave himself. And he said the latter was hard to do, but he needed to learn how to do it. Right now, we might feel like we're failing a lot. We come up with a practice plan, it doesn't really work, and again, remember and forgive. We used to go on trips. This is from a picture on Vancouver Island when you head to Tofino. We used to go away. That's how we got away. We are not getting away anymore. How do we create stress-free zones embedded within our daily lives? How do we do things so that we can stay well when we don't have the same opportunities to disconnect? We're all kind of working from home, coaching. We're not getting away the way we used to. And perhaps for some of us, sport used to be an escape where we used to travel and compete, and that's not happening anymore. So we have Kurt at the top and we have Maya Angelou at the bottom. And Maya wrote an autobiography. And in her autobiography, it was called Wouldn't Take Nothing for This Journey Now. And reporters were speaking with her and asking her if she wished some of the things never happened to her in her life. And she said that she doesn't will anything away because every experience she's had creates the wise woman who sits before you today. We know in my area that hardiness comes from embracing challenge and opportunity to become better when we have struggle. The world's given us a lot of opportunity for that right now. When we heard from Chris Hadfield, one of the things that he told the athletes and he told all of us was to gain a bit of a distant view from the situation. And there will come a time when this is just an experience that's happened in our life. Don't try and get through it. The obstacle is the way. Live through it, allow it to shape you and allow it to help you become the person that you're meant to become. Guy Winch is someone who also did an incredible TED Talk, and he talked about the concept of emotional first aid and the fact that we have a lot more psychological injuries than we have physical ones. And we need to acknowledge those and understand what we need to do in order to help ourselves heal and grow from things that hurt. And of course, one of the foundational people in this whole area is Kristen Neff, and she has a website and is unbelievably generous on that website. And she talks about this idea of self-compassion theory and learning to be kind to ourselves during this time. When people were still traveling, we had the unbelievable privilege of having Winnie Horn-Miller come to our community. For those of you who don't know, Winnie Horn-Miller is a Mohawk Canadian. She was the first female Olympian, I believe, who was a Mohawk Canadian, and she even won gold medal at the 1999 Pan Am Games. She gave a very long talk, and I had brought one of my students with me, Kevin Christensen, to this talk. And at the end of the talk, we were leaving, and it was an hour and a half, 2-hour presentation. I just said to Kevin, I said, Kevin, what was your takeaway from the presentation? And during her presentation, she spoke about the person on the right, and that's Billy Mills. Billy Mills won a gold medal in the 10,000 meter race in the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. If you were to look it up, it would still be called one of the greatest Olympic upsets of all time. He was not expected to win a gold medal. So Winnie was talking to Billy, and she said to him, basically, how did you do it? Like, that's crazy. You won that race. How did you do it? And he said, well, you know what? Most people invest 95% into everything they do. And you know what? They save 5%. They save 5% because they need to protect themselves, pick themselves up. They can't be totally broken because they don't know if they're going to, be able to put it together if they invest their whole selves. And Billy's comment was that, you know what? I invested 100% because I had a community of support around me, and I knew I could go 100% in because it didn't matter if I broke, they'd pick me up. And Kevin's comment, my student, said, how do we become that for the athletes? How does the sport system, how do I become that person for the individual I'm supporting? And when I think about sport, what's so beautiful about sport is people have to invest their whole selves in what they do. And you know what? When we ask them to do that, sometimes they break. And during COVID, a lot of our athletes broke. When athletes weren't able to go to the Olympic Games, when they had trials canceled, that was hard. How do we allow them to be honest and share their humanity with us about how deeply they're really hurting? And how do we become that team, that unconditional support team, so that they're willing to do it again? As we return to training, everything's super serious right now. We want to make sure we have all the protocols and everyone's social distancing and everyone's doing what they need. And I think it's really important that we also remember that we do it because we love it, and we love being there, and we love the moments, and we love the time together. And it's really important that we understand the power of laughter and community during this time, because that's really important. Even if we're not physically together, TED Fellows are incredible humans around the world, and this is one of the Canadian TED Fellows, and she had a beautiful quote where she spoke about quantum physics and how two entangled particles can remain connected when separated across space and time and even the universe. So let us be quantum, let us be connected, no matter how far we become separated, no matter how much time passes. And that's what's beautiful about sport. And that's the thing that's hard to put into words for people who haven't been involved in sport, is we do stay connected. The community, the things we go through, it's an incredible journey that we're doing together. And so whether it's in person or virtually, let's stay connected and remember. we're about to hear from two unbelievable human beings, and one of them is Miss Kelsey Wog, and she's a swimmer. And we had a group during this period called Terrific Tuesdays, and she spoke and shared her story. And this was one of the quotes that I grabbed from it, and we put it on a picture and put it up on social media. And it was, you know, she who has a large enough why can bear any how. And the hows right now are confusing and complicated. And as coaches, those are the spaces that our athletes need us to dive into right now. They need us to help us unearth that how and that why, and they need to remind us to stay connected to it. So for me, my main messages today were, you know, there is a reality of COVID-19. There's a reality of high performance and coaching culture. It's complicated, but we're all human beings. And how we treat each other and how we deal with that will impact performance. We have an opportunity now to learn about that in a unique way that we didn't have to pay attention to before, but now we're being forced to. And through it all, we need to make sure to take care of ourselves and take care of each other. And we need to understand that that's a really important part about performance and being our best. So again, in that chat area, if you guys could just talk with yourselves, what we're going to do now is we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to get to the true fun part of the presentation. And I spoke about some ideas and some concepts, and we have Vlastik Cherney with us and Kelsey Wog. And I want Kelsey and Vlastik to just talk a little bit about what worked for them. I think that I'm going to stop my screen share. Yeah, there we go. We're going to talk about anything in there that resonated for them, that they may have dealt with as athletes or coaches, and how they're coaching and training through COVID, and what we can learn from them. So on my screen right now, I can see Vlastik. So I'm going to invite him. Before they speak, though, I guess I'll say a little bit about who these humans are. Why not, eh? It's always fun when you do the bio. I know everyone loves it. But Kelsey Wog is from the sport of swimming. I think I heard the CAC refer to it. And she's someone who had a great last 12 months prior to that COVID shutdown. She had 3 second-place finishes at the Canadian World Championship trials. She was 6th place at the World Championships in the 200-meter breaststroke. She had 4 gold medals and 3 meet records at the Canada West Swimming Championships. She was a member of the Kelly Condor swim team for the inaugural International Swim League, where she had multiple second-place finishes over 3 meets. She had 4 gold medals and 4 U-Sport records, swam at the 2020 U-Sport Championships. She swam the fastest time in the world in 2020 in the 200-meter breaststroke. She swam the second fastest time all-time in Canada in the 100-meter breaststroke, and she was named the U-Sport Female Athlete of the Year. She won MVP and Bison Athlete of the Year. She was named Canada West Athlete of the Year in 2020, and also the CIS Female Athlete of the Year for the 2nd time ever in the history of our province. She's lucky to be partnered with Vlastik Cherney, who was born in Czechoslovakia and was a member of their national swim team from 1978 to 1982. He defected to West Germany in '82 and trained with a club there before emigrating to Canada in 1983, and was a member of our national team from '84 to '88. He did represent our country at many multi-sport games, including the Olympics in 1988. Started coaching full-time for the U of M in '93. He's been a member of the Canadian swim team coaching staff in Olympic Games, World Championship, Commonwealth Games, etc. He currently coaches Kelsey, and he was 2004 the Canadian Women's Coach of the Year, and in 2019 the U-Sport Women's Coach of the Year. So we have 2 great experts here, and I strongly believe that some of those unbelievable sport experiences were because Vlastik and Kelsey did embrace the human behind the performance, and so I think they are the perfect people to talk to everyone today. I'll just open up for Vlastik or Kelsey to jump into anything that kind of resonated for them.
Kelsey, you want to go first? Hello, everyone.
Okay, sure. I can go first. So I think a couple of things that really resonated with me about this presentation were for sure embracing recovery. That is something that I did really, really well in the lead up to Olympic trials. And I think that that is something that really helped boost my performance. We really decided to take strategic days off. So I took 2 days off a week, and I'd always come back after that day off much more rested and ready to go emotionally and physically. So that was one thing that really helped. And then during COVID, I guess kind of the same thing, just I did a lot of reflection, and it was important to accept where you were in the challenge and to just acknowledge where you were and not try to think too far ahead and not try to think in the past and just be where you are.
Excellent. That's awesome, Kelsey. And in my experience, it's tough to give yourself permission. It's tough for the coach to give permission for those recovery days. So good for you folks for having the courage to do that. That can be very hard. Mr. Cherney.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on Kelsey's recovery, I spent quite a few times chatting with Cal Bottrell, who was always, who's a sports psychologist as well, who I've history with. When I first started swimming in Winnipeg, I first met him and did some work with him, but he was always one that mentioned that we just don't pay enough attention to recovery, and recovery is one of the things that really can hinder performance if you just don't build it in. So that was part of why we did it, and that was actually something that helped me cope with COVID. You know, that was a lesson from COVID, because when we first shut down, we're at a high point in the performance with Kelsey, and all of a sudden there's nothing, no work. Initially there was hope that we would still have the Olympics, but as things got worse and worse, it kind of became nothing, and it kept me kind of grounded in terms of making myself believe that we wouldn't lose anything, that what we built up, yes, we might put the brakes on for a little bit, but what we developed will be enhanced by a little bit of a physical break, and once we get back to it, things will get back to normal. Now, it takes a little bit of time to get back to where you've been, but that was the biggest lesson for me, is not to panic and just take it as it. Was I a little bit depressed when it first happened? Put on a little bit of weight, and I'm working it off. But it is the sooner you can kind of accept it and say things will get better, accept the reality, but things will get better, and eventually we'll be able to train. And we've now been able to train for over 2 months, and not as to the point where we did before, but we are back in, and we're heading into some exciting times in Budapest.
Awesome. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit to the emotion piece in terms of because again, that embracing the human behind the performance. I've definitely seen you and Kelsey evolve kind of in your relationship, and a big part of that is kind of that emotional piece. So for you as a coach, I think it's uncomfortable terrain for a lot of coaches. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about your approach to that, or what you've learned, or how you approach that part.
Well, my own emotion, or probably both. My own,
sure, probably both. I'm thinking more with your athletes, but hey,
and the athletes as well. I mean, we're all products of our upbringing, and I grew up in a system where boys don't cry, and so the way I kind of look at expressing emotion, I just didn't, and it was hidden. And it wasn't until sort of later in life that I really had to deal with it. Had to learn to deal with it myself. And so just being and accepting that you do get emotional sometimes, whether it's upset and so on. And so I've learned that letting it out is okay thing, and just being emotional is okay. And with Kelsey, working with Kelsey, I always felt when she got emotional, like, like a little bit of was that, like, I didn't know how to deal with it either. So that's why I needed Adrienne to kind of help me out. That's why I needed my partner to help me out, and learn to accept it, that it's okay, and it's just let it pass. And when the emotion passes, we can get busy in being a little bit constructive. And so I think that's, a combination of things, just experiencing with dealing with an athlete that is a little bit more emotional, and getting over my history.
And in my observation, you really started to pay attention to it when it was impacting performance, and when you felt that it was an obstacle to reaching the places that you both wanted to reach. Kelsey, what was your experience with that?
Yeah, so I was always quite an emotional person. I mean, still am. But throughout the years, I've found it easier and easier to talk about it and express it with Plastic, as he's definitely become more open and willing to hear about it. And he's much better about saying, like, oh, like, how are you? I can tell it's not going great. Like, what's up? And like, conversation is a lot easier between us, and I feel like I can say what's on my mind and what I need to say to help further performance, I guess.
How would you say that's been different for you as an athlete? How has that helped you, having that kind of environment and that kind of relationship with your coach where you can kind of be honest with where you are? How has that impacted your ability to perform?
Oh, it's helped so much. I never feel like I'm wrong, and I just can say what I want to say. I feel like I can trust him. Like, trust is a huge thing. And I've definitely gotten to the point where I completely trust Plastic, and trusting him also makes me believe in my own performance and that it is possible as well. So that's really helped on that part and the communication side.
Excellent. For other coaches listening, Plastic, who might think it sounds cool, but you know, and you were very honest about your experience too. How did you become more comfortable, or how did you go? What were your steps to developing this kind of relationship with Kelsey?
Probably a mistake, making a mistake.
Okay.
And
Appreciate the honesty.
And it was linked to performance and how I tried to debrief something that's you know, I'm a guy, I'm a male, and I want to try to fix things right away, and there's a time and place to do it, and I just pushed a little bit too hard, and there was a bit of a conflict, and so through that process, I kind of said I need to get better. I sought some more information as to, you know, how I can make adjustments, and the biggest thing I think in terms of, for me, the emotion of not looking at an emotion as a negative, rather than just looking at emotion, how do we manage the emotion so that we can move on from what we need to move on from, and so that's just, you know, a little bit more self-reflective, but for sure it was hitting a roadblock where I walked away. Says if I'm to help Kelsey manage it better, I have to manage it better. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Thank you very much. I wanted to go back to the COVID because this is a coaching.
Sorry, I can give you a live example from yesterday's practice. Can I, Kelsey? Is that okay?
Yeah, please do. That's great.
So, I mean, we've been dealing with traveling and, you know, getting tested, and we're now on this WhatsApp chat with all the Toronto team and management. And each day, there's different information as to when we should be getting tested, and we're getting bombarded with conflicting information. And the last kind of 2 days, Kelsey hasn't been herself, and I kind of noticed that on Tuesday morning. Didn't say anything, and then yesterday afternoon, again, she was kind of getting upset. And so I kind of approached it, you know, from sort of that learning perspective of myself, is that, hey, it's just, you know, like, how are you feeling? And she would say, fine. But of course, I knew she wasn't fine. I said, so what are you worried about? And just being able to talk about it. In the past, Kelsey would just, because she would get emotional, would close off, and I couldn't get the information out. Whereas I just paused and I said, what are you worried about? And so she was able to communicate, and I was able to put things into perspective, you know, like, we'll just look, this is what it is. So we have different information, and we'll deal with it when it comes up. And I think I was able to calm things down a little bit with my approach. What do you think, Kelsey? Okay.
She's giving you the nod. She agrees. Yeah. But that's very important, is that she was able to share honestly about what was happening, and it's non-judgmental. That's something I heard that Kelsey said that's very important, so that then you were able to collaborate and work together to figure out what the best path was.
Yeah, and to go back to the human that you talk about, right, is that when we deal with performance, everything else that happens in life to a person affects performance. And so to take, say, a practice that is not 100% and you don't feel great about the practice, just putting it into perspective, say, hey, there are other things that are affecting what you're doing. So let's try to, deal with that and clear the mind, and then we, go tomorrow and there's another practice. Nothing gets lost. And so that we're not drawing conclusions from a practice that you wish was better, and I think that's huge. That's huge. That allows for a quick, let's put that aside and let's just focus on tomorrow.
I agree. Kelsey, you alluded to kind of the COVID period and doing a little bit of a reflection. If there was an athlete or a coach working with an athlete, and the athlete was struggling during this time, I'm wondering if you could share with us anything you found particularly helpful during this time to get you kind of back in, because return to play is not a direct return to play right now. Things are a little bit different, and there was like an abrupt stop, and there might be other people who feel that they missed some opportunities as well. Would you have any thoughts or advice for anyone listening in that situation?
Yeah, so I definitely found getting back into the sport after we were allowed to get back to it almost more difficult than everything being shut down. I had to do a lot of reflection and telling myself, like, what's happened is happened, and I kept having to trust Plastic and hearing him tell me that nothing's lost and that I can get back to it. So I just had to really trust that I'd be able to get back to where I was, because I think that's something that really stressed me out about it. And just remembering why I did the sport and why it was so fun. And I think that was something else that helped me start to enjoy training a little bit more, just remembering why it was really fun and why I want to keep going.
Thank you. Would you have any advice? You talked a bit about this, Plastic. Anything else you'd say about that COVID period? Any recommendations for coaches about this coaching through COVID?
I think so. There is a question here that we could address that kind of deals with that a little bit, but there are a lot of things. I think if you're not completely closed off and distressed about what happened, you can create new things, and you can learn new things. I think one of the things when we returned back to play, like you said, we're not fully in play. Kelsey's fortunate enough to be part of an international swimming league that will compete in the bubble. But for most part, we're just training. And so there are certain protocols we had to implement. And one of them was that I had to write the practice the night before. And what I'm noticing is, for me, I try to be a little bit more detailed with color coding my workout and what I'd like to see from the workout. But the other piece that I saw is that the athletes were way more engaged, and the quicker. I didn't have to explain as much, and some of them rewrote the practice on a piece of paper, or most of them did. Some of them printed it, and the ones that rewrote it, the quality of practice was a lot better. And so that's kind of learning from COVID a little bit.
With the learning, there's a question in here, Plastic. I've now found what the questions are. Mm-hmm. And it asks what motivates you as a coach and how have you evolved since you started coaching. So that's a bit of a deep one. This is a little expansion beyond COVID, but hey, we're all
I mean, we have, like, I've been in the sport my whole life. So I learned as an athlete. I had a number of really good coaches that I still look at as my mentors through even my coaching careers and swimming careers. I was when I first started coaching, I'm not the same coach that I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And I think it's a good idea for coaches as they go through their career to always kind of not reinvent yourself, but how am I changing, you know? And you cannot help but change. You change as a human being, so you're going to change as a coach. But the biggest change for me was, again, my upbringing, where I grew up in a coaching style and teaching style in school. Everything was do as I say. There was very little information sought from the swimmers and from me, and so it was, even though I knew some things weren't right, we were just in an environment where you had to do what you were told. And so that's something that I've changed in my coaching style. I try to be more open. I try to look for new things. I try to look for new things from swimmers, you know, and so I've evolved that way. And the other piece that I tried to really work hard at evolving on is the positive psychology, and try to, you know, when I grew up, it was don't do this, don't do that. The learning was, you know, always kind of a bit of a hammer, and it's the communication style in modern coaching, I think, and that's where coaching, really quality coaching, will go to, is to truly just focus on this is what you need to do rather than this is what you've done wrong. And that works way better in terms of learning, in terms of, you know, motivation, and providing information to the athletes.
Thank you very much. I love that. And I for sure can attest to the fact that I've seen a lot of growth in your coaching style in the ways that you've described. And I think Kelsey would agree with that as well. Given that this is a presentation with the Coaching Association Canada, a lot of the questions are for you as a coach, Plastic. So Kelsey and I are going to sit back a little, and we'll interject when we have something to interject. But I think that people want to hear from you as an active, high-level coach in our country, you know. And so one of the things they asked was, as a coach, if I haven't communicated in this way with my athletes before, like, where do I start, right? Like, how do I start to build that relationship? And Kelsey also, as an athlete, might have some input there as well. But I think that's a fair question. This is where you know, Brene Brown has this other great quote where she said that, you know, if you want to jump out of a plane, you have to be taught how to land first. And I think for a lot of coaches, you know, we're saying, hey, delve into this territory you've never dealt in before. I think they do want a little bit of a playbook in terms of, like, what do I do? How do I land? If I'm going to start this up, what's the process?
Well, I think the process is, was that a question or was it?
Yeah, that's sort of a question, yeah.
Yeah, that's so the process. I think the process is understanding that you don't know everything. You don't, you know, your biggest teacher is your athlete, and I've learned a tremendous amount from Kelsey. I've learned a tremendous amount from other high-level athletes, and typically the higher you want to go, the more you need to look in the mirror and understand that. You have to make some changes yourself. So I think that self-reflection and asking questions is critical to changing as a coach.
Absolutely. Do you have any thoughts or comments about that in terms of how you've seen that relationship develop, Kelsey, on the athlete end?
Yeah, I think something that's really helped with this is that we don't talk just when things aren't going well. We started talking when things were going well. And then as things aren't going as well, it's easier to talk.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's, if you only talk when things aren't going well, you really don't look forward to the conversations. So I think that's a really good point. Thank you very much. There's something very coaching specific related to the time period right now, Vlastik, and I'm just wondering if you've had different levels of comfort with your athletes in terms of returning to the pool, and how you've dealt with that. If you've had athletes that are leery of returning to training sessions.
It's very individual. You know, we've had some athletes that were ready to quit, like were undecided, you know, before COVID, and now they're just on fire, you know. And so I see a question: do you see recovery phase as active recovery? Mm-hmm. With a switch from physical training to mental training, and I think they go hand in hand. You know, if you get away from the pool a little bit, and you can allow yourself to recover. You know, the mental side is just as, it's almost more important than the physical side, because like, my belief is that you can go on with very little and maintain all your physical capacities. You can reduce your training by 50%, 40%, 60%, and the physical training you can maintain with very little, but it's the mental recovery that will really springboard you into a higher level once you get back to the physical side. And I think it's critical to shut off both. You know, that you know, the training has to change. You can still train, but you just don't have to be in the pool. You can be biking, you can be hiking, you can do all kinds of things. Yoga, you can stay fit, and you can get away from the physical side for a long time, providing, you know, you allow yourself to recover mentally, and then you just build onto another building that you've done before.
You definitely, thank you very much, Plastic. Kelsey, you spoke about recovery. Those were your opening remarks. Can you share with us a little bit about what recovery is for you? And I also know that you're very proactive about kind of understanding recovery from a physical but an emotional standpoint as well, and doing things to keep yourself well. So can you comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, for me, so physically recovering would be like taking a day off out of the pool, not doing weights. I'd probably go to hot yoga. I'd sleep in. And then mentally and emotionally, I think I would recover by not thinking about training, not thinking about the pool. And I'm attending university right now, so that was almost a really good way for me to mentally and emotionally recover, like taking my mind off training and putting my effort into something else for the day.
Excellent. I guess I'll bring it back to the title of the presentation, you know, the human first part. And is there anything else, Plastic, that you can think of, that any examples or stories you have as a coach, and even in your journey with Kelsey, where there were moments where it was very evident that this was the important part of coaching, was to acknowledge and understand the human behind a performance?
I think just, you know, it happens on kind of a daily basis that I have become more aware of how life impacts performance. You know, when I first started coaching, everything, you know, I try to measure everything. I had spreadsheets. I have all kinds of things that would measure performance. But quickly I figured out that life needs to be intact as well, in order to promote sort of recovery. And that goes for the coach too. You know, if your personal life is not in order, and I went through a difficult you know, relationship towards the end of my marriage, and that was tough. You know, that was tough to stay motivated, and what was toughest was to try to be creative when your own environment at home is not what it should be, and you don't have, you know, the relationship that you really need. And so that, I think, is important for a coach as well, keeping things in order, you know, in the relationship. And then if it isn't, then you got to move on and find somebody that will be that support for you at home.
And it was interesting, that was one of the questions that was asked in the chat area as well, was, as a coach, how do you access resources to keep yourself well? Similar to, you know, we do a lot to help our athletes, but what as coaches do we do to take care of ourselves? You may have already answered that question. I'm not sure if anything else comes to your mind.
Well, and part of it is just like what Kelsey talked about, you know, finding things outside of what you spend most of your energy on, and you know, doing other things. I like to bike, so you know, my partner and I go biking. You know, my fiance and I go biking, and we go out and we make dates. You know, we go out on a date. We're going on Friday night. so just having that distraction, and it works for your partner as well, having that distraction away where you put most of your energy into, and that becomes a certain, source of stress. So you want to just let go and enjoy something else.
So really, those are, that a lot of wisdom there. And I think that it really starts with understanding yourself and what you need to stay well. And the formula is different for everyone, but paying attention to when you're your best coach and the types of things you need to do. So that I always say, sport is such an emotional roller coaster, and it's so demanding. And we do need to be able to we need to be well physically and emotionally to be able to tolerate what we need to strive to be our best. And I think that's really important. So thank you for saying that.
And high performance is an extremely focused, and it requires enormous amount of energy, especially the higher you climb the ladder. And so to be able to fully disconnect and enjoy something else really helps, again, the next step and come back with more energy.
Love it. Thank you. And Kels, anything else that comes to mind for you when you hear that human first piece, or any kind of thoughts or advice or takeaways you want people to go away with?
I think you just really need to love the sport and love what you're doing if you're gonna give it your all.
Absolutely, I agree. Well said. And I think that that needs to be protected. I always say you can't do sport and you can't do high performance halfway. And I think even as some of our people are returning to sport, that's what's challenging, is they know that. And you can get hurt, and so you have to make sure to take care of yourself when that happens. Protect the heart. It's important. Any final thoughts or advice from you, Blastic, before we finish up?
I think, there's no such thing as perfection. You can just strive for it. And that's how you get better every day.
Love it. Great. Well, I know that we enjoyed. I'm not sure if Isabel comes on and closes it off. I think we're getting close to the end of our time, but I really thank everyone for joining us and sharing in a conversation with Blastic, Kelsey, and myself. I will just pause for a second and see if Isabel shows up. There she is.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adrienne, Kelsey, and Blastic. It was great to hear from all of you. It's wonderful to see the great work that's happening and how we get some real life scenarios of what's going on around the country during COVID, this incredible time that we're living through right now. So I think we can all learn from you and are motivated and inspired to keep doing what we love and taking time out to spend with those that we care about. So thank you so much for your time today. And we just want to encourage everyone to provide us with some feedback and reach out if you are looking for additional information. We also have some resources that Adrienne has put together for the coaches, and we'll make sure to circulate that as well. So thank you again to everyone. And I also want to do a quick shout out to my colleagues. So James Davis, who's on the call, who coordinated a lot of the work to get this up and running today, as well as Pascal Villeneuve and Natalie Joannette, and Dario, who's also on the line for all our technical issues. So thanks to everyone at CAC as well. And we'll see you hopefully next month. Thanks to all the coaches that are participating on the call today. We're going to run our next in the series on November 18th, I believe at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll be sending information out about that. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Travel safely to Blastic and Kelsey. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.